I would like to make a shout out to First Amendment to the United States Constitution. He is another YouTuber who exposed fusion centers. You could look at his video. It's at the description below, the link. Take a look at that. The big question out there is who are responsible for the majority of the gang stalking in the United States. And there is a high probability that either the fusion centers are responsible or they have a guiding hand in the gang stalking cases here in the United States. We have an actual document created by the ACLU exposing or attempting to expose fusion centers for infringing upon individuals' human rights. And here is the start of the document, and I will leave a link of this document in the description below. And as you can see here, we have the ACLU right there, down at the bottom, far down, far right. And it's the American Civil Liberties Union who made this document. It is a group of lawyers here in the United States who, again, they attempt to protect all human rights. Okay, and here we have the origins of fusion centers, and we're going to go over a few things. Very important, because this is where the United States is heading. The public needs to know. Another factor fueling the emergence of fusion centers was a trend with policing moving away from traditional law enforcement methods toward what was dubbed intelligence-led policing. What that means is that law enforcement, the traditional folks with guns, that the intelligence community wants to move away from that, and they actually want community policing. But again, that is dangerous, because you could be flagging people that haven't done anything wrong, anything illegal, and you're flagging these people, and then the community turns against these people. And then not only that, you could also get revenge entities, which means that these private sector folks could simply just want to get revenge on somebody. They put you on this certain target list, and then the community could go against you. It's basically ripe for abuse. And let's continue. These centers evolved largely independently of one another, beginning in about 2003. To meet local and regional needs, which means that these fusion centers are pretty much kind of like rogue. There is no oversight. Nobody is overseeing these fusion centers, not the media, not Congress, not the public. Nobody is checking these fusion centers. The only one who has attempted to do this is the ACLU. Here, the ACLU just talks about the dark history of abuse of secret intelligence powers. It talks about the program called COINTELPRO and how COINTELPRO was exposed by the church committee back in the 1970s. And this COINTELPRO program, what they did is they basically disrupted and destroyed the lives of many dissidents or civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King. Basically anybody that spoke up against the government at the time or who wanted civil rights. COINTELPRO program will go in, infiltrate, and destroy people's lives. And they would do it continually without regard for human rights. And this is the abuse that the ACLU is concerned about with fusion centers, that they are using the same similar tactics as red squads, suburban squads, where they basically get a target and they destroy them by harassing them. And that is pretty much what the COINTELPRO program did. And you could do your own research on that, and I'll put a link in the description below if you want to read up about the COINTELPRO program here in the United States back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And here, was a part of the problem. The church committee found that part of the problem with COINTELPRO was that no one outside the FBI was ever supposed to know it existed. This is the same thing is happening with fusion centers. Nobody knows that they exist. Only a few people know that they exist. But that is why I'm making this video, so people could know that fusion centers exist, number one, and two, that it's possible that they're infringing upon human rights. They're abusing their power. There is a secrecy created, a haven for the public eye where abuse could flourish. And again, the ACU is concerned that fusion centers are headed in that direction, or actually are already there in that direction. And again, they say here that they operate in considerable secrecy. And it does raise concern over the overall direction which these fusion centers are headed. The ACLU is very concerned. And in the report, it does describe the serious problems with fusion centers. And this is one of the main problems that the public should be concerned. That fusion centers exist in no man's land between the federal government, the states. And not only that, now you have the private sector involved. It's pretty much a wild, wild west where fusion centers are in charge of fusion centers, which means that there is no oversight. And it could be described as a state police intelligence units on steroids. And these are other problems. The federal government is playing an essential role in all of this, giving financial assistance, they're sponsoring, they're giving clearances, and they're providing guidance and training. The FBI is involved. Department of Homeland Security is involved. And 30% of fusion centers are physically located within federal agency workspace. And here's another problem. Fusion centers refresh their databases regularly. What that means is they pretty much erase everything they do every day. So that means if somebody comes with the Freedom of Information Act and they're dragged into court, there is nothing to present because everything is erased. That is pretty serious stuff right there. Secrecy. And here it is. It is potentially disastrous for private citizens trying to pin down responsibility for mistaken information on that is turning their lives up and down. So that means a person could give mistaken information about a particular individual and pretty much just destroy their lives because they flagged them. And then after they flag them, they pretty much open up a quote-unquote investigation or quote-unquote infringe upon the civil liberties of that individual. The problem, Department of Homeland Security benefits of a nationwide intelligence collection center with none of the headaches that come from privacy laws, open record statutes, and other necessary elements of a democratic government. So basically, the direction that is headed into a police state. Fusion centers are made, and it is basically what is happening with these fusion centers is making America close to a police state, similar to what you saw in East Germany and similar to what you saw in Nazi Germany and similar to what you saw in Cuba and similar to what you see today in North Korea. And even today in Cuba of today, even today you can still see some of this stuff. That is very dangerous when the United States of America is headed in that direction. Here is the dangerous part again. This is where the United States is headed. Fusion centers are poised to become part of a wide-ranging trend of recent years in the United States, the creation of a surveillance industrial complex in which security agencies and the corporate sector join together in a frenzy of mass information gathering, tracking, and routine surveillance. That is extremely dangerous, guys. Extremely dangerous. And the public needs to be aware. And another dangerous part again, the guidelines emphatically encourage fusion centers to invite a wide range of public safety, public works, social services, and private entities to participate in the fusion center process. We're talking about schools, bus transit, city workers, all walks of life in the public sector involved in fusion centers. And I don't mean like all of them involved, but the people that signed up for these as basically soldiers, quote unquote, for these fusion centers, there's a small percentage in each one of these sectors that are involved. We just don't know who. And here we have just a list of all the public sectors, there's universities involved, physicians, defense contractors, etc., etc. And again, some of the dangerous parts, some private entities foresee an active role in all aspects of the intelligence process, which means that these people are regular citizens. Quote unquote, they are citizen spies and they live among us. And these people have intelligent clearance for certain things. And that is extremely dangerous because you are merging the government with the private sector, where you kind of have a blurring of lines where the government almost becomes a private sector. That's communism, guys. That is a socialist country. This is where the United States is headed. Dangerous times. Dangerous times. Some fusion centers hire private companies to store and analyze data they collect. So we have private companies holding our information. Not the government. These are private companies, guys, involved in the government now. Again, the merging of government and the private sector. Extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. And this is, again, where the United States is heading. And again, the ACLU says that the private sector involvement is a bad idea. It's a bad idea. And it goes over the list of why it's a bad idea. Again, private companies could use classified information to gain an unfair business advantage against its competitors. That means that these private companies have the inside information, the inside scoop of things. And again, it's a merging of government, intelligence, and the private sector. Dangerous. And then again, companies become an extension of the surveillance state. Again, the dangerous part of the merging of intelligence community and the private sector. And not only that, private partnerships provide opportunities for the government to mask illicit activities. So now that the private sector is involved, the private sector could do the illegal activities that the government doesn't want the people to know that they're involved with. Because now the private person takes the fall and not the United States government. Or quote unquote fusion centers don't get buried. Is the private person that did the act, the illicit act, the illegal act gets buried. And again, companies can glean personal information from security requests, which means that companies know, again, your private information. And here is probably one of the most important parts of the ACO report, in my opinion, is that private participation could lead to private retaliation, which basically means you have rogue people involved. And if a person doesn't like you, they could flag you and put you on this list. And basically, it is used now as a revenge tactic. So it is possible right now that you have private people involved in the intelligence community. It could be your neighbor, again, in the public sector. And they could put you on a list to be, quote unquote, gang stalked as a revenge tactic. And again, the other problem, employees of companies assigned to fusion centers, which means that all the participants in the public sector, again, any participant in this quote unquote, as soldiers for the fusion centers, could be asked to spy on their neighbors or employees. Again, they could spy on their neighbors, clients, co-workers, or employees. Again, another main concern is military participation. And they're going to explain, the ACLU will explain why that is dangerous. And this is why it's dangerous. It is because the involvement of military personnel is especially dangerous at a time when government officials are using hyperbolic rhetoric about the threat of terrorism, basically a fear campaign for people to be afraid of terrorism, to scare Americans into abandoning their civil rights. So the intelligence community and the military are using scare tactics so people could give away their civil liberties. And again, this is where our nation is headed. Another problem is, again, data mining and fusion, which pretty much is, again, no privacy. They know everything. And here is another problem, that people could report all suspicious activity creating a culture of fear that encourages overzealous reporting. And not only overzealous reporting, again, my concern is revenge from the private sector, that a person that doesn't like you could flag you just to destroy your life, just for the simple fact that they don't like you. To me, that is the most dangerous part of this. They should collect information concerning an individual only if there is a reasonable suspicion that the individual is involved in criminal conduct or activity relevant to that activity. However, again, most of the suspicious activity is a non-issue, and we're going to see how there's a lot of false positives in this system. Okay, I want you guys to take a look at this here. This is a hypothetical of data mining. That doesn't add up. And again, this is the ACLU did a study, and what they're saying is basically just a drain on investigative resources. If 990 terrorists are caught, that means 3 million people, innocent people, are going to be harassed, investigated, stalked. 3 million to catch only measly 990 terrorists. That means 3 million people, again, are going to be harassed, lives probably destroyed, reputations shattered, just to capture 990 terrorists. Again, this is why this type of approach to intelligence, it's wrong. And again, I'm going to repeat, not only is it wrong, the private sector is involved. So the private sector, again, could flag you. And we all know when the private sector gets a certain amount of power, they will abuse it. And that's what we have here, a all-out abuse of power from the private sector. Only the public doesn't know about it. Fortunately, there is too much money and people involved in future participation and not enough terrorists. Now the program covers any suspicious activity. With so much funding, if there isn't a criminal, the police state will create one to keep funding going. The USA converting into communism before my very eyes. Call or email your Congress rep to investigate fusion centers. Stop gangstalking now, or you could be next.